Hey everybody, my name is Dave Snyder. I'm a designer that loves working in terminal systems, and this is part 2 in my series on how to style your terminal, your syntax highlighting of your text editor. What we're trying to do is basically build a theming system, not just like a theme itself and the colors, but we need more an actual system that can manage those themes across a bunch of config files. So when we were talking about the goals last time, I hadn't really figured out how I was going to do some of that management stuff. I had seen that there was something called a Base16 manager, which sounded pretty good. But the one that I ended up really liking and have tested out and switched a couple of my configs over that I'm going to show you is this one called Flavours. And Flavours is really easy to install. If you're, on Arch or something, you could just install it off the R or something. And so you just go and run Flavours, it'll install it within it, and then you essentially get a bunch of different commands that you can run. So there's an update and apply. What Flavours itself does, though, is that it takes all the templates and all the color schemes that live in Base16. So templates being individual config files that might match against Alacrity or FCF or i3 or Rofi or anything that you're using, and it matches it up against those 16 color codes, the actual color schemes that are in there. So I'm using Horizon Dark. This is where I was last time, so things don't look that interesting, right? The nice part though is if we jump back over to our other window here and we pick apply and we say, let's make this actually solarized. And we'll make it solarized dark. That's something everybody's going to remember. I could reload my i3 and you can see suddenly both my i3 windows and my Alacrity terminal are sort of set up for something, set up for that kind of stuff. One nice thing is that I've also got this working with my Vim stuff as well. So I just kind of wanted to show off, like, what is this that we're actually doing? How does Flavours work? Flavours essentially installs a bunch of config files locally on your computer. It puts them in the local share Flavours directory. And then inside here, you'll see those templates that I was talking about. So there's an Alacrity one. It's got a template that links up against a template that can inject those color schemes within it. And so it's using the Base16 notion in here. We see, the 00 to, this normal sort of Base16 notation in it, and then it's got some color stuff on top of it. So I could say, look, give me a hex code for something. Each one of these templates, because templates themselves, if you've worked in any sort of Linux system before, or really just in a terminal, everybody's got a different config that's very different. So you can actually have multiple configs that live within there. This one has two, one for the base default, and then one for 256 color mode. And all that really is, when we look at this, is it is just two different files with two different config files. So how does that actually work? Well, the one that we're looking at right now is for Alacrity, and specifically I use a 256 color terminal. So I would like to use something like this to apply my Alacrity color schemes. So think of it as like Flavours stores and applies the templates and colors, but you still need to inject Flavours into your individual config files. And it's actually extremely powerful when you think about it. So if we go into my home directory, we want to go to my config Alacrity YAML file. Now, normally my Alacrity YAML file had a really big color, part of it that looked exactly like this. And it's where I hand inserted all the individual hex color codes that I would need for whatever setup I needed. And so what's really cool about Flavours is it has two important lines. You have one that's called start flavors, and then you run it to the end and you put end flavors on the end of it. Now, what ends up really cool with this is, and I'll show this off by opening a new window, is that if we go and say flavors apply horizon dark, you'll see now that these colors switched across the board over here. Now, it didn't do it perfectly yet because Vim, which it's also changing, needs to be sourced so that you can actually see it make that change. But once we source the Vim file, we can see that that actually loaded. I also need to reload i3 as well, and you'll see that the coloring for Horizon Dark has changed. So I haven't gotten it perfect yet because most Linux files need to be restarted. I'll need to make some scripts on top of this so that as I just run the flavors apply, that it can flip that across the board. But what we can see that's really neat is that as long as I put in any sort of config file, you know, a start flavors and end flavors, it can go and switch the color scheme to whatever themes that I have. Now, this is really important with Linux-based config systems because they almost have a completely different notation. It's not like, you know, a web system like SAS or JavaScript where you just set like some base level variables and you can cascade them through the document. Everything looks a little bit different. And so let's look at, for example, a, you know, Rofi setup. So my Rofi file, you know, let's just look at it real quick. There's a theme file that's in here, down here at the bottom, and you can see it loads rofi base.razi, right? And if we go look at that file itself, hold on, would help if I actually picked it correctly. If we look at that file itself, similar to the Alacrity YAML file, it's got a bunch of color codes in it, which let's go and show this off again. Let's turn it back to, you know, Solarized Dark. We can then, you can see that those X colors change. And if we source our Vim file, you'll see that it's switching over to, it's switching over the colors as well. So it does, you do have to go source stuff, which is kind of lame. But like I said, I'll make some scripts that actually handle this a little bit better. The important part is to see that Flavors is making the application. So that's all well and good. How do you actually set this up? And it took me quite a little bit to figure this out. So I'm really happy I set up a video because I think a lot of people who don't know these things would kind of love to see a little bit of it. So Flavors itself, like anything else, has its own config file. And because everybody has a config file in a different format, Flavors is in TOML, or Tom's obvious markup language. And so the basics of it are that you set up a new item for every single file that you want to be themed. So for example, that Alacrity one that we talked about, that's a YAML file. We're saying use the Alacrity template, use the default 256 subtemplate. So if you remember when we looked at this stuff originally, and just to kind of show this off again, if we're going to look where all this stuff lives, it installs all of it within this flavors directory. If we go into Base16, go into templates, we can see the Alacrity one. There is a default and a default 256. If you don't set a subtemplate, it's just going to use the default one. And so we're saying, look, change this Alacrity file, use the Alacrity template, specifically use this template. So when it's going to do that, it's going to look at this 256 one, and it's going to insert this sort of template system with these colorings. And these are just mustache variables against, again, our Base16 color scheme. It then will inject it within start flavors and end flavors within our document. So it's taking everything that is set up from this template and then throwing it in that document because that's where we told it to do it. Now, as soon as I started using this stuff, and this is why I love Flavors, is I realized I do a lot of really, really custom stuff, just like everybody else does, right? That's the power of these kind of systems, is you can tweak them, do whatever you want. I realized I didn't really like their templates that they had set up. They did coloring wrong. You can see, like, if I were living in this world, this purple thing would drive me nuts. I'd want to fix it, right? And so what's really nice is you can come in and actually set your own sub templates up if you want. So for example, for what's something that's more interesting, probably my Rofi setup, right? So looking at that last one, I want to edit the Rofi setup. And so let's just look at what file we're actually editing from Rofi. We're going to that base 16. Of course, I had it open already here. We can see the file that I'd like to edit. I'm telling it in this case to do a rewrite equals true. And what that means is, unlike the Alacrity setup where I have to set up a start flavors and end flavors, and the reason I have to do that is because it's like within a very, very large file where there's a lot going on, I can just say, hey, look, just rewrite the file. You don't need a start flavors, end flavors. Just go ahead, do a full rewrite of the file with the template that's provided. So let's look at the template that we needed to make. Making your own template is really easy. You go into your config directory, you're going to go set up flavors, and then you're going to say, sorry, I'm in the wrong directory, local share flavors. Again, come into your templates directory. Let's find Rofi in here, which, whoops, of course, give me a second. This will be a little bit easier if I just go directly to it and use NNN on it. Let's go to our templates that we have set up. Let's look for the Rofi one in templates. There were a bunch that automatically got installed. All that I did was set up a new one called custom.mustache. And if you look at it, it's the same as our output file over here. We've just actually edited it, you know, to use the hexes where we want them to. The reason that I did something like this first using one of theirs is I care a lot more about other things that are in this file. There's borders, there's margins, there's all kinds of things. I'm going to make my own custom theming system. I don't want to live in the, you know, the setup that, you know, Rofi has decided for its default, right? There's a lot of stuff going on here. It's not something like, I don't want to use EM units, you know, for example. I want to have it set up the way that I want to set it up, which is perfectly fine. And that's why Flavors is pretty cool. It's basically just saying, look, you can use the base 16 templates. And again, as a reminder, we're talking about the templates, which are for each individual program, and then you can apply it to a scheme. It downloads all of those for you, so you don't need to worry about it. What you can do, though, is add your own custom ones. And if you look at my flavors file here, you'll see that I've actually edited and made pretty much all these things individual custom ones. And that's just going to allow me to be able to edit those templates on the fly, to get everything like colored perfectly as much as I want. Because if there's anything that we've seen looking at a couple of these files by now, it's the usual sort of like Linux love where, or really just development love, where it's like everybody has their different system. We're looking at, I don't even know what we would call it, like quasi Pythonic, maybe, with the, well, it's a pure YAML file, I guess, with Alacrity. We've got a CSS inspired file that Rofi uses. We're using TOML for flavors itself. And then inside individual, that's why these files themselves are just set up as mustache files, because you can do whatever you want, put some curly cues around it, and you're going to be able to inject those colors how you want. So, like I said, when we went through and looked at our, and let's close a couple of these windows out. when we went through and we were looking at our wiki that we had set up and our goal for this type of thing, we hadn't set up a whole bunch of files. You know, I've got what, 5 sort of set up over here, but we need to do all 10. And where you're going to see where Flavors is not necessarily failing, but where I haven't set things up yet completely is we haven't set up FCF, we haven't set up NNN, we haven't set up Polybar. So there's still a lot of things that need to apply these coloring systems. But the nice part is, as long as they have a config system, and they pretty much all do, we should be able to go in and make these edits directly. So as an example, if we look in here and let's just do save flavors on here, and then let's do a tab on it to get it to autocomplete. Right now, it's not matching the color scheme. And that's because we haven't set up config yet for it. Now, if we wanted to, this stuff is all coming from FCF. And so I'm going to need to make, you know, a new config FCF file that's based upon all the theming that we have in there. I can't even remember where that lives. It's probably something like config, what, F? Nope, not even in there, right? There is the one for BAT, themes, horizon theme. So I haven't done this one yet. So when I want to do like color coding of individual files within BAT, like for example, let's just go to my EUI directory and go into my source. And if I wanted to BAT the index dot, what do I have in here? Nothing good in here. This would be fine. It's, you know, using a color scheme that's still based on these hard-coded color values, which isn't great. So what I would actually need to do in here would be to come in, make a new file, say, I want to edit actually, you know, config dot, where was this one? Config bat themes horizon dot tm theme, and then I would need to give it a template, you know, like a default one. Probably wouldn't use a custom template, and in this case it's the only thing that's going to be in that file, so it's going to be okay for me to overwrite it. Now, you know, we are going to tell it, actually this template here would be for BAT. And then we would need to see, okay, does, you know, Base16 have a version of BAT? And they don't, right? So what would we do in this situation? We'd actually have to come into, if we just wanted to test this stuff out, we could go into our local share flavors, again, go into that Base16, go to templates. We would make a brand new directory, right? And we call it BAT. And if we look at the structure that we have within here, we would make a, it looks like a templates and a config.yaml, right? So make a new directory, templates, and then we make a new file called config.yaml. And then we would make a file default dot mustache, right? And then we could take the contents of what our file normally looks like, which is that theme file, right? And then what we would do is we would come in here, make a very nice looking XML document, and rather than using these individual string values in here, we would come through and say, okay, instead use the base 00 hex version, right? And then at that point, once we saved this file out, we'd be able to run the template, it would say to run a rewrite on it, it would rewrite this Horizon theme file, which is the one that we're looking at here, and it would use this template as our thing to actually do the run of it. Now we haven't edited much in this file. We've changed, what is it? This one string that's under caret. So it should be this line right here where you have that hex. Now let's give it a shot. Make sure that this thing works. And we edited our config file, correct? We added a template for bat. We said rewrite equals true, and we said that we want to change that one file. So let's give it a shot. Let's see if this will work. It should only change that one directory, but it should also make a really ugly XML file because we haven't really stylized this one yet. So let's see what happens. Let's go back to Horizons Dark, reload our i3 again. And there you go. It actually worked. Hey, look at us. So this shows you don't actually need to go through and make to use their templates. Flavors is really smart. You can just add a new template. You can add a new theme if you want to. And then it's just going to go through and make that apply on it. Obviously, what I would go through and do next is clean this XML document up, maybe a little bit more. And then I would go through and add more of these strings. So you can at least see it did change this color that was applied here. It's that base one. Let's double check it. Let's put solarized dark on it, and then go through and look at it, and you can see, yeah, that color, this is not one of those ones that are in there. In fact, we can see, hey, we would need to apply a pound symbol in front of it because it's a hex color. So rerun it, you'll see, there we go. Now it's got that pound symbol in front of it. This is going to give you a base way to do your styling. And what I really like about Flavors is because it's just doing all this text editing, the files that you're actually saving, the output files, are something that you can just push to your dot files or something. Like, it doesn't need like a whole bunch of magic. Even if you didn't run Flavors and you just ran it once, like, those files that it uses are going to be perfectly fine. So in a lot of ways, I really like that because it's super duper generic, but it gives you the flexibility to, like, when you run into some system that doesn't really work, or you want to change the way that the templating itself works, you can just go make a couple new files in that local share directory and then use that and apply it to those files. So man, to me, like, that's all I need. And one thing that I've noticed with like Base16 Manager and some of these other managers is that because they are so templated, if you're making like a, the theme template creators aren't thinking of how these things relate to each other. So even when I'm looking at this stuff, I'm like, man, this doesn't look very good to me, and I know I'm showing this off. I'm not showing off the beauty of this stuff yet. We're going to do that in the next video. What we're really showing is we've got the boilerplate abilities now to give us the flexibility to do whatever we want. So in the next video, when I start, I'm going to start by showing you like, hey, I've already gone through, I've made a bunch of different files for it. We're going to show that like they're going to be styled correctly. It's not going to look like this one where it's like, hey, it's still got a hard-coded value in it. We're going to have everything running kind of perfectly. If I'm lucky, I'll have something set up where I can get all the various like systems like i3 or Vim to like do an auto scripting reload of all my Alacrity systems, but might be pushing it. We still have a couple other systems that we're going to need to set up as well. But I'm guessing we're going to do one more video, maybe just on the system level work. And then following that, we'll work on actually building the themes themselves. But this was really cool. I think Flavors is something like everybody should check out if you're interested in this type of work. It's going to work for you. It's going to take maybe a half hour to learn it. All right. I'll see y'all and look forward to it on the next video, hopefully up in a week or so.